We're going to turn now to Genesis chapter 30, continue our story. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, "Give me children or else I will die." And Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" And so she said, "Here is my maid Bilhah. Go to her, and she will bear a child on my knees, and I also may have children by her." Then she gave him Bilhah, her maid, as a wife, and Jacob went with her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. And then Rachel said, "God has judged my case, and he has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore his name is Dan." And Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, "With great wrestling I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed." So he called him Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took Zilpah her maid and gave her to Jacob also as a wife. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, "A troop comes," and she called his name Gad. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. And then Leah said, "I am happy, for the daughters will call me blessed." And so she called him Asher. This is the word of God for the people of God, and we know there's a whole lot more to the story than the parts that I read. But how many of you like to watch soap operas? I know I do. Yeah. You know, those soap operas just seem so unrealistic, right? People coming back from the dead, you know, missing, we think it's your sister, but no, it's really this sister, and this, oh, you know what? A lot of the stories in the Bible could be created as a soap opera. And this story is one of them. Because we got a lot of deception going on, we got trickery going on, we've got lying, we've got cheating, we've got competition between sisters. It would make a great movie, wouldn't it? I've never seen a movie done on this story. But it would make a good movie because it's more like a soap opera than anything else. So let's talk about this story. On the back of your cover is a little genealogy map in case you get lost, because it's easy to get lost in all of the 12 children that are listed as part of the tribes of Israel. But it all starts back up there with Isaac, really. The father of Jacob, who also had another son, Esau. And if you remember back in your Sunday school days, the story of Jacob and Esau, those brothers that were constantly fighting with each other. They even fought with each other as to who was going to come out of the womb first. So these brothers were always fighting and always trying to one-up each other. And at the end of their father's life, Jacob and Esau wanted to have the blessing from the father. And usually the blessing went to the oldest son. So that's what they expected. But Jacob tricked his brother out of his blessing, if you remember that story. Jacob tricked Esau, his brother, out of the birthright and out of the blessing of the father. Well, Esau's mad. Jacob knows he better run for his life. So now with this part of the story, Jacob's on the run, trying to find his new place away from his brother. And he ends up going back to the homeland of Laban, who was his mother's brother. So are you following the family tree yet? Laban was the brother of Jacob's mother. So he thought, well, if I can at least go be near family, maybe I'll be safe and they'll protect me. So he ends up at this well, that well they call Jacob's well. And he asked the people that are coming there to get water if they know who Laban is. And he says, not only do we know Laban, but his daughter should be coming by to get water for the sheep. Along comes Rachel, the second daughter of Jacob. And immediately Jacob falls in love. I mean, that's true soap opera, right? And it's immediate, I'm going to marry this girl. They go back home to Laban, and Laban is so excited to have a family member and to be able to marry off his daughter, but Laban now has his own ideas of deception. Because it was the culture for the first to always be married off first. And you had to pay a dowry, you had to pay a price to be able to take your daughter, because if you married off a daughter, then that daughter was no longer useful in the household. They didn't do the chores, they didn't work the fields, they didn't do what they needed to do to help provide for the income of the household. So the family would have to recompensate for that loss by asking the one who was going to marry them for some money, for some property, for some livestock, to pay for the daughter. Well, Jacob had nothing. He was on the run, remember? So he says, well, let me work for Rachel. I really want to marry Rachel, and I'm willing to work for it. So Laban said, fine, give me 7 years of labor. No pay, just room and board, and then you can have Rachel. Jacob thought that was a good deal because he was so in love with Rachel. But Laban had other ideas, because he's got this other daughter, the older daughter, that nobody had yet come for and didn't want. He had to do something about her. So when the 7 years was up and it was time for Jacob and Rachel to get married, Laban tricked him again and said, let's bring these people together, let's have a marriage. And instead of it being Rachel, he tricked him into marrying Leah. So it was a commitment. You didn't get divorced, you didn't separate, you had a commitment. He stood by his commitment. And so they started having children. And Leah ended up giving him 4 boys. Because he had said, I'm going to stick around, and if you give me more time, I'm going to give you Rachel. Laban said, give me another 7 years, and then you can have both wives. So in that 7-year period of time, Leah and Jacob have 4 sons. Now, could you just imagine what Rachel's going through? She loves this man, and she's watching her sister live the life that she wanted. Rachel's watching her big sister have children, and Rachel's just waiting still. So after those 7 years are up and they come together, then poor Rachel can't have children. She's not able to give him any children. Rachel just gets more and more frustrated, more and more upset, more and more jealous that here's the sister able to do what she can't do. She's heartbroken. But they're together. Jacob has 2 wives now, Leah and Rachel. But since Rachel can't conceive, she wants to do what she knows she has to do to continue the family line. And so she pulls a trick out of Abraham and Sarah's book. Let me give you to my maidservant. Let's give you a 3rd wife. You can have my maidservant, and we will have children through her. Well, now Jacob has a 3rd wife. And they have sons. And if you look there, they're all listed by number on the back there. You see that Leah has the first 4. And then it jumps over there to Bilhah, where she has Dan and Naphtali. Then it flips again. Because Leah's not liking it that all of a sudden now Rachel's got power. Because when you have children, you have power within your family. Leah didn't like that. So Leah decides, well, if she can have her maidservant, then I can have my maidservant. And now Jacob's got 4 wives. Whew! Jacob. They have together Gad and Asher. And then Rachel is just so distraught because what she wants is nothing more than her own child. That she bargains with God and says, if you would just give me a child. And then Rachel finally has her 2 children, the last 2 of the tribes, Joseph and Benjamin. These 12 men, now you know there were probably girls in the midst of that, but they're never listed. The only girl that's listed is Dinah, the one daughter. That's a whole nother story for another day. But these 12 boys became the 12 tribes of Israel. And each of them then went off and tried to do their own thing. And if you know the story of Joseph, that he gets trapped into the mess with Potiphar and his wife and the Pharaoh, but Joseph then continues on the legacy. And so this family history continues from Cain and Abel to Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, and then on to Joseph, and then we'll move on to Moses. These stories of these women are a piece of that story. So what can we learn from these two women who despised each other, who tricked each other, who competed against each other? Well, the story goes back to Jacob. Because if you remember at the beginning, I reminded us that Jacob and Esau had fought as siblings, competed against each other, deceived each other, and Jacob thought he got away with it. He thought he got away with taking that birthright, and he wouldn't have any consequences because God hadn't struck him down yet, so I must be free and clear, let's go. Guess what? God's got all of eternity to make things right. And that's the good news of the story, is that when somebody does wrong, it's going to be rectified. God is going to take care of it. We may not see it in our lifetime when somebody hurts us and does us wrong, and we just shake our hand at God and say, why did you allow that to happen, and why didn't they get punished? Why are they doing all this? Why are they, or why, God? When God says, I got it. I got a plan for that, and I'm going to use that deception for good later. And out of that deception between Rachel and Leah, we've got the 12 tribes of Israel. We've got Joseph. We've got Benjamin, and those that went on to do really great things. So no matter what wrong may be done to us in our lives, God is going to make it right. But it's also a reminder that when we try to mess with God's plan, God's going to mess back, right? God's got a plan for all of us. And sometimes, I said it last week too, sometimes we think we've got a better plan, or we can get it done quicker than God can get it done. But we got to be patient and wait for God. We got to be patient and wait for God. Because the other part of that is that whatever our ancestors carried with them, if it's not resolved, it gets carried to the next generation. And we're going to see with Joseph and Benjamin that the sins of these sisters gets carried off to that generation. And those brothers, of the 12 we just mentioned, are going to fight against each other and throw their brother Joseph into a well. The sins of the past keep repeating themselves unless somebody stops and says, we're not doing this anymore. So if there's sins from our past that we need to rectify with God, we need to do that, because we don't want those bad behaviors, those things that we do that we know are wrong, to pass on to the next generation.